Hello everyone, my name is Gus.
Hi, I'm Woody.
Today we have, well, let me just start by saying that last time we reacted to Mr. Deified story, people were upset. They said...
At us?
Yeah, because they said this guy uses AI stuff to put the scripts together. His, storytelling is annoying.
What's wrong with that, by the way? Why is everybody against the AI thing? Because I use it, so I'm wondering.
Storytelling is annoying, and do not dare to cover this guy again.
So we are.
So today we have another video by Mr. Deified. This one is called the some of the worst cave diving stories I have ever told. I haven't seen it. You haven't seen it. Let's take a look and add commentary along the way. You have a way to pause it, by the way? You should probably get the...
hold on.
The keyboard. Just want to be respectful because people are like, do not pause it. So make sure you're ready to pause. Are you ready?
You're in a very, very respectful mood today. Neither one of us are, to be honest.
All right,
let's
here we
roll.
go. Oh, man.
I just thought I'd pause it.
Oh, good. That guy just dropped his spool, which happened to me in Mexico. We're going to go back next year, so please help me find my spool. You pay half of it, so help me find it.
One of them involves a group of friends who undertook a cave diving expedition in France to film a documentary about it. This cave has oppressively tight squeezes that are painful to force yourself through. This was a place they should have never entered. Viewer discretion is advised.
Oh.
Difficult section.
Font Estramar is a massive submerged cave system in
Barcelona.
Alpha Spring, located in the Cordillera Maritime region in south-central
Climbing
France.
there is amazing.
Font Estramar isn't as complex as many other submerged cave systems, but its sheer size makes up for its lack of intricacy. However, offshoots crisscross the system, making it almost impossible to navigate. Maps of the cave exist, but there's no record of anyone swimming into the far chambers.
Okay.
Spanning nearly 9,900 feet or 3,000 meters from end to end and plunging more than 1,000 feet or 310 feet below the Earth's surface, it's the deepest known resurgent spring and fifth deepest siphon in the world.
By the way, I just want to mention that we've gotten this question a couple times where people are like, well, how come these caves, like, people haven't been there or whatever? How common is it to find caves that are, unmapped or that haven't been explored or whatever? It's actually very common. Most caves have not been explored all the way. Like, all of the popular caves that we dive in Florida, they haven't found the ending. They are still doing Peacock Springs. The KUR team in Peacock Springs, Peacock 3 entrance, they still haven't found the end of that. Ginny, arguably the most popular cave in Florida, if not the world, in the amount of cave divers, they still haven't found the end. It's like 18,000 feet or whatever of exploration. Jackson Blue in Mariana, still haven't found the end. Like, a lot of caves don't have an end of line. And we call EOL or end of line. And every time you actually get to an end of line in a cave, it's like a big thing. It's like, whoa, I made it to the end of line because there's either way more to explore and nobody has been there, or that's legitimately the end of it. Like, you and I have been to ends of lines that were laid by Sheck Exley, for example, the father of cave diving. So it's pretty awesome to see that. But for the most part, caves are largely unexplored, meaning we haven't found the end of them.
The cliffs of Font Estramar are located on municipal land. The pond and cave entrance are on private property. So, getting to the site is also a risk.
Or you can just
The owners have been known to take extensive measures to keep people off their property.
Dude.
Over the years, there's been an ongoing feud between the landowner and the municipal authorities, the scientific community, the search and rescue organizations, and private diving associations over who should have access to the cave. The landowners do not want you here, and if you show up, they will make you pay.
Cool people.
The team discovered and cataloged several new shafts, passageways, and chambers, but their progress was hampered by the rudimentary gear of the day. Famous French oceanographer Jacques Cousteau dove at Font Estramar in 1951, but by the mid-50s, nobody had ventured deeper than 165 feet or 50 meters into the system. He had a near-death experience and decided that he would never enter a water-filled cave again.
Jack.
It took him years to recover from daily panic attacks after this ordeal in Estramar. The cave is roughly shaped like a figure 8, slanted at a 45-degree angle. The larger of the two loops is located to the northeast, while the smaller sits to the southwest. But unlike a regular figure 8, the two loops are separated. However, they're connected by a relatively straight 250-foot or 75-meter passageway called Lee Boulevard. This is a notorious stretch of the cave that most people die in. French diver Jean-Claude Gois and his brother Dumas and a group of friends set out on a multi-day expedition to Foin Estramar. They had been looking forward to the adventure for a while and finally pulled the trigger after two of the friends had near-death experiences on other cave dives. During the expedition, the team planned to take as much footage as possible to use it later to produce a unique documentary. Using this much equipment while trying to navigate the cave's safety was an added risk that they were willing to take. Jean-Claude's brother wanted to take smaller cameras and lights, but his older brother convinced him that they'd be fine using the larger ones. On the morning of the first dive, they were all confident when they waved goodbye to the support personnel on the surface. It seemed like nothing could go wrong because the weather was so nice and everyone was in a good mood that day. Their dive gear was a far cry from what it is today. But they delved deeper into the cave system than anyone had ever done before. And more importantly, they captured tons of amazing footage. Motivated by their groundbreaking work, they encountered their fair share of obstacles and perils along the way.
This looks awesome. This cave looks great.
They hadn't dealt with before. In fact, they did so well and got so far ahead of schedule that they decided to up the ante by pushing deeper into the cave system than they initially planned.
Look at the water, it's crystal clear.
But the further they went in, the passages became narrower and more confusing.
Unless this is Jenny or somewhere else.
Their very presence stirred large quantities of silt into otherwise clear water. They also dealt with physical exhaustion and temporary bouts of disorientation. But all in all, the dive was a resounding success, despite the fact that their air was running out far faster than they had expected. They were breathing hard in the cave because their adrenaline was so high.
Wow.
It was like they were diving again for the first time.
That's 3 bailouts.
Nearing the halfway point of one particularly productive and exhilarating day, the team decided it was time to return to the surface. With nearly a week of dive time ahead of them, it didn't make sense to really push things too far on any one day. They wanted to do as much as they could, but had some scares while trying to navigate, and that was enough to let their survival instincts kick in and slow them down a bit. The men were tired and anxious and wanted to get their feet back on dry land. They stayed close together on the return trip. But somewhere along the way, Jean-Claude became separated from the group. It's unclear if he was too exhausted to keep up, got lost, and experienced an equipment issue.
Dude,
whatever the case, the others didn't realize that they were a man short until they finally broke the surface.
I'm trying to figure
out Look at the Powerade.
Brotherly love and the bonds they had being what they were. Dumas couldn't stand around and wait.
We don't bring drinks and snacks like imbeciles.
Cool. It's amazing. I never even seen anybody do that. But I'm trying to figure out what's happened because so far it seems pretty ordinary.
Yeah, but it's starting to happen. The guy got disconnected from the group. They don't know why.
For Jean-Claude when he needed him the most. Nobody knew where he was or what happened to him, but he wasn't missing for that long. They still had a good chance that he was alive and everything would have been okay.
Well, yeah.
After all, Jean-Claude was a strong swimmer and an experienced diver and had a good head on his shoulders. Dumas figured his brother was probably swimming around at that very moment, and all that he had to do was just enter the water to find him and then lead him back to safety. And then he would be the hero, and his brother would have to thank him for the rest of his life. Dumas knew that returning to the cave after a long and exhilarating day was inherently dangerous. If the tides were turned, he was sure that Jean-Claude would risk his life and limb to save him. He would never let anything happen to his little brother. Even though Dumas really wanted to go, it was very hard for him to go back into that cave. He knew it would be extremely dangerous for him and that he himself would probably die. With that being said, Dumas slipped through the narrow opening into the main passage of the cave. He immediately began feeling around along the rough walls and shining his light into every nook and cranny.
I guess he was zero of it.
He was also really tired at this point, so he wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing or going the right way. He felt his brother's presence, but every time he caught sight of something that looked like human form, it turned out to just be a shadow or...
I just had this thought. He was talking about how the guy was so exhausted or whatever. You know how you were exhausted when you came out of the water in Abaco? Would you be at a position, if you think of how you felt, to go back in the water to do something when you came out? Like, imagine I'm not coming out and you're like, oh my God, Gus is stuck or whatever. Would you be like, I'm just calling the police?
Call the police.
That's how bad it was.
I just physically wouldn't have been able to do it. I have to admit it. I remember the feeling of just, I had to fall forward to the O2. I could not even stand on my knees. I do. I often think about it. And I still don't know why I was so exhausted. And I know, you were bent, but, well, I don't know. There was something else going on. But I could not go back in and get you.
Wow.
I was incapable.
Amazing.
Yet another wrong formation. Dumas held out hope that he'd eventually find Jean-Claude in the darkness. But his air eventually got so low that he had no choice but to call off the search and return to the surface. The ascent was particularly laborious and heartbreaking because Dumas had the sickening sense that his brother was nearby, and even worse, he still hadn't breathed his last breath. Rescuers carried out an exhaustive search over the following days, but no sign of Jean-Claude was ever found. By then,
it's right
everyone
there.
knew
There's an arrow.
He was probably gone, and that he might have died shortly after becoming separated from the group.
Dang.
Jean-Claude's death rocked the close-knit diving community, but at least inwardly, most divers couldn't help but wonder how far into the cave he'd gone, what happened, what raced through his mind as his life passed before his eyes, and whether or not his body would ever turn up.
But exactly what happened? I'm waiting to hear what happened. Do they know?
Dragging it.
The section of the gallery where he disappeared was eventually closed off to prevent similar tragedies in the future.
So they never got him?
As the years passed, the incident was largely forgotten. Then, 3 years later, an unwitting diver exploring Point Estramar stumbled onto human remains wedged into a narrow crevice not far from where Jean-Claude was last seen. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition.
No.
But there was little doubt that it was Jean-Claude because much of his gear was still strapped on what was left of his body. The gruesome discovery also highlighted the cave's well-deserved reputation for danger. Story number 2. Even as a child growing up in Belgium,
so we don't
it
know
was
what
clear that Mark Sluszny was destined for great things.
And died.
Mark was a fearless and inquisitive child with tons of interest and excelled at nearly everything he put his mind to. In 1988, he completed a 55-mile, 88-kilometer solo swim across the English Channel in less than 11 hours.
Remember that.
And a few years later, in 1994, he set a new high-altitude bungee jumping record by throwing himself out of a hot air balloon 22,000 feet or 4.2 miles above the Earth's surface.
Okay.
By then, Mark was already an accomplished diver as well. And in 2011, he produced a documentary called Sharkwise after spending months with great white sharks. In 2016, he joined an American scuba diving expedition to the wreck of the Andrea Doria, 250 feet or 76 meters below the surface of the Atlantic off the coast of Nantucket, Massachusetts. Believe it or not, this is just an abbreviated list of Mark's noteworthy accomplishments.
Look at that, 2 masks.
Older, Mark focused more and more of his energy on coaching and consulting businesses, but he needed his adrenaline fix from time to time. And for him, nothing fit the bill like exploring new frontiers, challenging himself, and pushing past his mental and physical limitations. On the morning of June 28, 2018, Mark and his longtime friend and fellow diver, Laurent Richard, were planning to do just that under Luquette Pond's placid waters inside the famed and enigmatic Estramar cave complex. They had permission from the
What happened with
landowner to
Andrador?
dive at the site, as the
Stories,
landowner
they're not
was
really
actually a fan of Mark's.
concluding.
Getting the go-ahead was little more
We're
than a
back in
formality.
France.
I don't even know so what happened to the other guy? Is he dead? The last one? I'm just trying to get to this bottom line. All right, well, that was a long time to wait for. No, I don't even know what happened. All right.
No, the
Because
guy.
Mark's reputation
Now we're back in
preceded him
France.
basically everywhere he went.
Let's see.
He and Laurent were familiar with the dangers they'd face in such a sprawling and largely unexplored cave complex.
So the same AI footage.
Even so,
again,
they
okay?
weren't
Same
about
cave.
to let it spoil their experience. After slipping into their gear, Mark and Laurent disappeared beneath the surface and made their way to the cave entrance.
Okay.
Mark was
That's what
joking
you
around
do.
the
You
whole
go
time
under.
before they got in the water.
What happened with
and Laurent was
Andrador,
starting
though?
to get a little sketched out about how Mark would act in the cave.
Remember the
The
Titanic?
Why
dive
would he
actually started out
sketch
amazing, and they got a thrill from knowing all the new discoveries and challenges were finally within their reach after planning this thing for months. Things
Okay.
went well early on, and the challenges they encountered only added to the exhilaration. Like Mark getting some of his gear stuck.
But I'm not getting any reference. Like, are they way back? Like, I don't even know how far back the other guy was that got stuck. Is that?
It looked like it was pretty far back, but he didn't say.
So we have no.
Oh, you're still on story number 1. We're already moved on to story number 2.
I didn't even
He
know
just
we
dropped-
ended one.
He dropped the name of a wreck in, like, oh, by the way, the Andradoria. And then,
Now we're
oh,
back.
by the way, we're in France. Like,
on a
what?
sharp rock
why
and
I'm
ripping it
struggling
off.
to follow
but
this one.
he had some backup equipment with him,
Well.
and he was able to figure it out. However, Mark and Laurent eventually got tired after the initial adrenaline rush wore off.
Is this the guy who
And
found the
shortly
body?
after, they reached
Is that
their
how they
bailout
connect?
time.
So not.
In other words, their air reserves were running low, and they had to turn around and head back to the surface.
Right. That's how that
Bailout
works.
time is the point of no return. There's always a bit of leeway factored into account for unforeseen contingencies during the descent and ascent.
Correct.
Mark knew that the dive was coming to an end one way or another.
If you were,
Well, yeah.
this is my reaction. If you were like, let's say you're just laying in bed and you're watching this, right?
Yeah.
There's no way you don't fall asleep.
It's
right?
a goner.
I'm gone. Or the voice,
Yeah.
the background music. So if you want to take a little napper, you may want to pop this one on.
Go for it.
Like Jean-Claude Gois, nearly 70 years before, he decided to press on when
Oh,
Laurent
boy.
turned and began swimming back towards the exit. Mark was going to do this by himself, and he didn't care if he was breaking the rules of diving. Ever the risk taker and trailblazer, he waved goodbye to his friend and swam in the opposite direction
I haven't been sleeping well. I'm going to play this later.
until he reached a depth of 380 feet,
Oh.
or 115 meters.
Yikes.
This is extremely deep to be in a cave. And at this depth,
It is.
your air goes out much faster. This was far deeper than he initially ever planned on going. Mark may have allowed himself a brief moment to relish yet another success.
Wow, this is a
but he
deep
also
cave.
knew he had to get back to the surface as soon as possible. And that pushing the envelope too far could have dire consequences. We'll never know exactly what happened next.
Oh, boy.
But shortly into the return trip, something went horribly wrong. When Mark failed
got
to
stuck,
resurface after what seemed
he
like
died.
an eternity, Laurent rounded up
some other
additional
guy ran into
divers
him.
and re-entered the cave system to look for the missing
Same.
Belgian
That's
phenom.
enough.
The situation didn't look good.
Sorry.
There was a chance that Mark was okay, and that they'd all share a good laugh about the incident later that night over cold beers. But at that moment, Laurent decided to film the rescue instead of finding Mark. As he and the other divers descended, they immediately ran into silt in the water that looked like it had been recently disturbed.
Okay.
Now, with a positive sign of life, they pressed on with renewed vigor. But along the way, Laurent got so wrapped up in capturing footage that he separated from the group. The other divers never found Mark.
That's similar like when
Wait,
I die with you and
so lost.
and you never look back or ask if I'm okay and then I don't know where you're at.
But
Is
that's-
that what you're talking about?
That's okay. But in this case, if I'm following correctly, you tell me if you're still awake and you're watching this.
I'm not.
Leave a comment for clarity below because I don't know if I'm following. So, the two friends got separated. Like, okay, I'm about to die. You're about to die. You go on. I go out, which makes no sense, but whatever. Because he said he knew he was violating every rule of diving, or survival or physiology. And he decided to keep going. But then the rescue team arrives, and they're going to go in, and the guy is like, oh, I'm going to just film everything. But I get so caught up in filming that I also get separated from the rescuers. I think that's where we are. The original friend who left is now back with a camera. He's like, oh, dude, we're going to watch this video later and laugh.
I think we are, but we may end up back on that wreck at any moment.
And worse yet, they only realized that Laurent was missing when they resurfaced at the end of the failed rescue attempt.
Now I know the guy's
Now there were 2 missing men instead of just 1. A large-scale rescue effort was launched over the following days. It was eventually called off a week later. It looked like Mark and Laurent might remain missing forever. But that wasn't the case.
Nope.
2 months later, in September 2018, Mark's body was discovered and removed from the cave. However, Laurent proved far more elusive. It's impossible to determine what happened to Mark, but many expert divers agree that he was totally unqualified to make such a dangerous dive, and that he was only granted permission because he was so well known. In other words, the very fame and accomplishments that made him so remarkable may have contributed to his death and the death of his friend, Laurent. Of course, Mark and Laurent could have got lost and run out of air or suffered from hypercapnia, which is too much CO2 in the blood and tissue.
You got that right.
Hypoxia, which is too much oxygen in the blood and tissue.
You got that one right too.
A number of
hypoxia is too little.
You got that exactly
you got
backwards.
50-50. Yeah.
I didn't know if you... Okay, good. I was awake enough to catch that.
Records were set in Font Estramar in the 1990s and early 2000s, but they were followed by a string of 6 deaths between 2008 and 2023.
I think he meant hyperoxic.
Hyperoxia, yeah. I want to go to this cave.
Sistema Saka Tun is an underwater cave system located on the Yucatan Peninsula along Mexico's Caribbean
Now we're in
coast.
Mexico.
Okay.
The cave system became an overnight sensation in 2008 when the remains of the mastodon were discovered just a few meters below the surface.
By the way, if I'm not mistaken, Saka Tun is the longest underwater cave in the world.
Wow.
But despite its anthropological significance, Sistema Saka Tun is an even bigger draw for experienced recreational divers intent on exploring the unknown and pushing themselves to the limit.
Right.
The cave network is unique because it's made up of multiple cenotes or open-top sinkholes that are connected by submerged passageways.
Massive.
The day in question was warm, clear, and sunny as 3 divers prepared themselves for a safe and altogether unforgettable experience. The 3 men's identities were never revealed, but they were all relatively experienced divers.
What does that mean?
The lead diver was a 33-year-old guide and certified cave diving instructor from the Mexican state of Quintana Roo.
By the way, on our next Mexican trip, this is what I'm hoping to see. Do you know what I'm hoping to see? Mm-hmm. The people in front of me carrying my tanks.
It's good to hope for things.
Already experienced and explored the cave system with students and clients on multiple occasions. By then, he logged about 25 hours of time on closed-circuit rebreathing gear. He'd only had ever used it in open water environments.
Right.
Very little is known about the other 2 divers in the group. However, the second diver was equipped with a CCR unit, while the third was using an open circuit system. Sometime after noon, the men slipped into their gear and reviewed the dive plan and checked their equipment one last time. At about 2:15 p.m., they finally entered the water and headed toward the submerged labyrinth. The day's dive was broken into multiple sections, each of which was marked by a starting point and an end point to help them stay on course and track their progress. The first portion of the dive was a relatively easy 30-minute swim between points 1 and 4 that ended with the majestic cenote Saka Tun. Along the way, they installed safety lines to ensure that they'd know which way to go if anyone experienced an emergency. When they arrived at cenote Saka Tun, they swam to the surface, enjoyed some fresh air, and talked about the next stage of the dive before continuing at about 2:50 p.m. They knew the second stage of the dive to cenote Nariz would be more challenging. They were surprised when their progress was halted by a narrow bottleneck in the passage that their bulky gear prevented them from squeezing through. At that point, the lead diver decided to turn around and lead the others to point 5 via an alternate route. His arms and legs were completely scratched and messed up from that sharp, tight passage.
Dang.
The unexpected detour wasn't a big deal.
Shred your
went
dry
off without
suit.
a hitch. It initially looked like they'd reached Cenote Nariz on schedule. At 3:15 p.m.,
Beautiful.
Diver 3 motioned to the others to let them know that he'd reached his turn pressure. In other words, he'd already used 1/3 of his air. This meant that he had to turn back. The idea was that he'd use another third on the return trip and still have the last third left over in case he ran into trouble along the way.
Or emergency.
As Diver 3 began to turn swimming away, Divers 1 and 2 continued on and eventually passed point 7 en route to point 8.
Wow.
Wait, what?
Now they were in a deeper
split?
and more challenging portion of the cave system.
Zoned out.
Then, just when they were closing
Wow.
in on Cenote Nariz, Diver 2 was startled by an unexpected flash of light behind him. He spun around to see what had happened. When he did, he immediately noticed that Diver 1 was in serious trouble. Diver 1's face was as white as a sheet, and his eyes were wide with terror. Diver 2 wasn't sure if his equipment had malfunctioned or if he was having some type of seizure. He rushed toward the other man to see if he could help. By then, Diver 1 was flailing his arms and legs wildly, and in the frenzy, his regulator fell out of his mouth and got tangled in his gear.
What?
Diver 2 had little choice but to move away. In these situations, a desperate diver can pull at you and detach your hose,
Right.
essentially killing both of you instead of just himself. Divers are actually
could be
taught
true.
to distance themselves from stricken colleagues in violent throws. Panicky divers often lash out and grab onto would-be rescuers, and when they do, they can injure them, damage their gear, or even prevent them from swimming away. On the way out of the cave, Diver 2 ran into Diver 3 somewhere near point 7. They both surfaced at 4:52 p.m. and immediately sounded the alarm bells. The recovery operation commenced the following day. It was conducted by 2 local cave diving instructors who were supported by local divers, police officers, and representatives from the civil authorities, all of whom remained at the surface ready to intervene if something went wrong. Diver 1's body was recovered quickly, and though the exact cause of death was never established, evidence suggests that he experienced cognitive impairment and drowned. The question was, what caused the cognitive impairment in the first place?
Aliens.
Diver 2's account of the incident seemed to indicate that he experienced hypercapnia, hyperoxia, or perhaps both at the same time. Data taken from Diver 1's dive computer did reveal a number of oxygen spikes throughout the dive, but medical professionals and expert divers don't think that they were high enough to cause hyperoxia.
Or
And
deep
that's all I
enough.
have for today's video. And thanks for watching until the end.
Oh, God. Well, now we know. He titled this some of the worst cave diving stories I have ever told. It's not worse as in people died. It's worse as in you're going to struggle to stay awake.
That background music, it's like
Soothing.
hypnotic.
Soothing. Go to sleep.
And then basically his story is leading to exactly no conclusion whatsoever.
There's
Did not
nothing we
help
can learn.
with.
No.
So this was a good episode to ask again if anybody actually made it to the end. This is more challenging than that other one to make to the end, I think.
I agree. And I feel like it proves that our viewers are right. They were right to say, don't react to this guy ever again.
And we did.
Which means we'll probably do it again.
So we'll do another
because
one.
we never learn.
But Terry's probably still with us.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I
that.
will.
So,
I
thank
will
you.
say that in case you missed that episode where everyone told us to never react to it again, I'm gonna leave it right here so you can go check it out and follow Mr. Dayfine.
Yeah, and if you want
Let's
to
make great content.
feel
in the
free to
past.
watch this every evening for your sleep medicine rather than actual sleep medicine.
Sweet dreams.
I'm going to sleep right now.